This is a continued discussion from the previous episode of a Fresh Perspective podcast, brought to you by Corbion.
I think within baking, it's getting the track and trace and the sophistication of what's happening now within the whole sustainability issue. It's just getting more and more sophisticated, and digital tools and technology are really helping the industry push forward in that regard. And I was out to dinner last night with a person in the industry who's with an ingredient company, and she was saying they are going to do some testing on the life cycle of a particular ingredient from the time that they locate it out in the field to what energy it takes to get it all the way into a baked good, and see if they can start to minimize the environmental impact to products. So I really do think it's getting more and more sophisticated what's happening in this area.
Yeah, it's incredible. The stories are incredible.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the study a little bit, because when we think about size and we think about the different types of manufacturers, there has to be a big difference in programs in place between baking manufacturers making under $100 million a year and those making over $100 million a year. Based on your work and all of this great information you have, what can smaller baking manufacturers learn from the larger ones? Charlotte?
So yeah, we definitely saw a pretty significant gap between the sustainability commitment between the small to mid-sized baker versus the larger bakers. And that also goes back to the question about why ingredient manufacturers are so far ahead. I know we've spoken to Mark Hatzi at Corbion, and he talked a lot about on our webinar about Corbion serves bakers across the spectrum. So you got to meet the large bakers who are global and have these very sophisticated KPIs around sustainability, as well as the mom and pop bakers who maybe are just trying to like turn a profit year over year. So when you're meeting all of those demands, that you got to meet the top level first, and then the bakers who are under that just benefit from that as well. I think the thing that when I talk to bakers about what they can learn from larger bakery manufacturers, it all comes down to just start measuring, just start tracking what you're already doing, because for a lot of the environmental, especially those initiatives, are already things that are going to help streamline your operations and reduce your waste, reduce your cost.
Right.
And so a lot of baking companies are already doing these things, but they're not looking at them from the perspective of sustainability. And if they would just clue in, start tracking them, they'd actually discover that they're already doing a pretty significant lift on their sustainability initiatives. And once they get that baseline started, they can then start to set markers for how to improve those things. And then the other thing I would say for the small to mid-sized baking companies who don't know where to start, don't try to keep up with the Joneses, as it were. Pick one thing to start and go from there, because you're not going to turn it around overnight. Sustainability is a journey, and it's a marathon for certain. Like, we all know this is extremely critical for the health of our planet and the health of our society, but you're just going to burn out. You're going to drain all of your resources. Start small and go from there.
Right. I think what you said is so critical, especially when you talk about streamlining our operations. If you're running in a smaller place, start small and choose the ones that are actually going to help your business. So you're actually, you get a double benefit there, right? You're helping the planet and you're helping your business. It's a great way to start. It's not difficult to write things down, put them in a place, and then eventually if you yank them out and see how far you've come.
That was honestly, I know we keep coming back to it, because that was the biggest gap that we saw throughout the whole study. Was we would ask bakers, equipment, and ingredient manufacturers, are you engaged in these initiatives? And then we would ask them again if they were tracking those initiatives and having a formalized goal. And there was a pretty significant gap. A lot of people said they had a plan in place, but usually there was a 20-point difference between those who said they had a plan in place and those who said they were tracking it. So some of those things are really, really hard to track. I get it. Like day-to-day bakery operations is very up and down, but just putting in that effort to start tracking things. And there are lots of resources to help you do that through the American Bakers Association and the Environmental Protection Agency with their Energy Star program. These things, starting out with just getting a baseline of what you're already doing, is just a really good starting place.
Nice. So they could contact the ABA or...
Yes.
Okay, excellent. To get some help with those things. Love it. So what about social initiatives? These seem to be a big focus. What do you think about those, Charlotte?
Yeah,
Why do you think there's such an emphasis there?
I mean, I think another point I'd like to make is just like with the environmental initiatives, how you're probably already doing a lot of these things, you're probably already taking really good care of your people. Like when we looked at the initiatives that we chose to put in the study, employee safety. Everybody is taking care of their employee safety. If you're not running your business very well. So like that's a no-brainer thing to your day-to-day operations and the safety of your employees. Employee wellness includes things like providing healthcare for your employees, paid parental leave, like all of these things are things that companies are already doing to take care of their employees because they know if their employees aren't well taken care of, the company's not well taken care of. I think this all goes back to especially with the labor crunch that we see and how bakeries and their allies have to really make themselves employers of choice. Social responsibility initiatives can go a long way to making your company as attractive as possible to potential employees and the employees that you already have, making them feel taken care of, and then pouring back into the communities that you're operating in. I know every conversation I have with, especially bakers, they're a giving, generous group of people. And when they find success in a community, they want to give back to that community. So we see things like a heavy involvement in charitable giving, as well as generating positive community outcomes as well as just taking good care of their employees. Because if they don't, no one's going to show up on that line the next morning to bake that bread. So,
Right. And it's becoming more and more important after COVID, honestly. I mean, I say
yes.
after. It's not after, let's be honest. It's going to happen. It's going to be here forever. But after the pandemic and everyone staying home, and now that we're all getting back in the world and resuming what we consider to be normal lives, I think that the social responsibility stuff is becoming upfront and personal, right?
Extremely. And employees are picky now, and they can afford to be.
That's
So
right.
they're going to go work for people who they believe are taking good care of them. And I just think the pandemic just really shifted something in the mind of just people. They want to be taken care of, and so that they can then also take care of you. So
That's right.
I think that's what comes down to social responsibility.
So, Deanna, at Corbion, following on with the social responsibility initiatives, are we using those to recruit and retain, or do you have some ideas when it comes to recruiting and retaining employees?
Yeah, so we already talked about the positive impact of having a sustainability program on employee engagement, retention, attraction, etc. And one of the things we did at Corbion when we started building our sustainability program, we also created a sustainability ambassador network in Corbion. So we have many different locations, both manufacturing locations, but also sales offices, etc. globally. So what we basically asked every location to do is to nominate 1 or 2 people at each of those locations that were already motivated to contribute to sustainability. We also did some workshops to identify who those people are. And then basically we give these people the opportunity to propose and also implement social or environmental projects. And it could be either projects really at the location itself, focused either on an environmental issue or on some social topic that we'd like to improve at our location in Corbion, but also community projects and including volunteering. So those local ambassadors basically can propose that type of initiatives and then also really follow through and implement them. And then what I really like about this network is that we are also connecting these local ambassadors. So they, on a regular basis, exchange ideas in the global ambassador network, also to inspire each other, and they can really learn from each other. And then we work with our communications team. So also our corporate communication team is quite involved in this. So that we can really create stories and share these stories internally and externally. And over time, we really see that this increases engagement and also that it helps in recruitment.
Excellent. Yeah, I love the Corp Comms team's involvement. I love the idea that they all talk and get together. And I think that those ideas are something that anyone listening to this podcast could go, oh, that's an excellent idea. I could use that in my own company. And so hopefully they do. It helps everyone, helps the whole planet, helps the world. So we love sharing ideas. Marjorie, first of all, we talked about formalizing programs here a couple of times. What does that mean to you? And then what benefits do you think companies get from actually doing that formalization process of the sustainability or even social responsibility programs?
Well, I think all of us today on the pod have talked about kind of what those targets might look like. And they're going to vary, of course, by the type of operation. And I am not a baker, and so I can't get too granular about what those KPIs might look like. But having these KPIs in place, looking at sustainability within company leadership, just as you set up KPIs for your sales goals and you're tracking that earnestly and on a certain cadence, and you're looking at employee safety and you have KPIs in place for that. We want to keep injuries at a minimum. We want to control these things. Adding formalized targets and applying those to sustainability efforts does all the things that we've been talking about. It makes you more profitable. It makes your employees want to stay with you. It's inspiring. It's not always a pretty picture because it's a journey, as Charlotte said. But having them in place, I think, if you're not measuring it, you're not controlling it, right? I think we've talked about the importance of that. Being able to communicate within the organization and outside of the organization, the good work that you're doing and the value that you can bring to your customers. Formalizing is the key to success. And I think that's the bottom line. And I would also note that anytime that Cypress and Baking and Snack come together to do industry research, one of our driving goals, regardless of the topic, is going to be lifting up best practices or maybe common challenges within the industry to mirror that back to the industry so that companies, yes, it's at a 30,000 foot view. So you're not just locked in your own business and thinking, what are other companies doing? I'm lost, I'm down my rabbit hole. So one of our driving goals is always to lift up and to show some trends at the industry level, but take those insights down also to the company level. In this study, Jenny, we tracked 14 different areas under the heading of environmental sustainability programming. So it's very programmatic. 14 here, 11 there, 9 there. Companies can take those internally to their boardrooms and say, are we doing these things? Maybe we should be adopting this type of program or looking at this. So that's always a driving goal when we're working together.
Yes, for sure.
It's great because not only does it give them data, but it gives anyone that reads this study, or maybe even like a little bit of a guide, right? Like we could be doing, if we have to pick one thing, we could pick one thing out of this guide, right?
Sure.
That's excellent. Any last words? Can people read this study? Where can they read it? Where can they get more information?
Sure, that's a great question. So we wrote up a wonderful report in the October issue of Baking and Snack, which you can find digitally at bakingbusiness.com. And then we also have, if you go to bakingbusiness.com to our webinar archives, you can always register and watch our webinar that we did with me, Marjorie, Mark Hotze of Corbion, and Chris Wolf of Beanbo Bakeries USA, where we went through a lot of the data and got both Mark and Chris's insights on it as well. So you can get the baker and ingredient manufacturer's perspective on the data. I also believe we're working on a white paper type download on bakingbusiness.com for you to be able to download a lot more of the charts that have been available either in the magazine or on the webinar. So be on the lookout for that as well.
Excellent. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me today. That's all the time we have. Any last words, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Just thank you, Jenny, for giving us the opportunity to talk about this with you today. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Great.
and so I would also say just get started because it's something that brings so much benefit and pick something small and just start doing it.
Thank you. Wonderful way to end up. Pick something small and get started. That's all we have the time for today on the Fresh Perspective podcast. I'm Jenny Colzer. Don't forget, preserve what matters.
Thank you for listening to a Fresh Perspective podcast brought to you by Corbion. Until next time, preserve what matters.